Now, I think it's time for the first session of the day. Is it? Do you feel like it is time for the first session of the day, Dan?
Yeah, yeah, Sandro is asking, I think, yeah, Sandro, you can turn on the camera and mic on. Yes.
Awesome.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Awesome. Because I was having problems with my microphone before, so I was a bit worried. So I'm glad that you can hear me and see me.
Well, loud and clear. Well, let me just say a few words about this, because I've written them down, and they're good, I promise. And now, time for the first session of the day, a panel of software modernization held by two experts in the field. On the one hand, we have Sandro Mancuso, who I'm looking at, a renowned software craftsman and speaker, author of the Software Craftsman book. So he wrote the book on software craftsmanship. I think this joke has been done before, but I never get tired of it, sorry. Co-founder of Codurance and founder of the London software craftsmanship community. Welcome, Sandro.
Say that again. A second.
Hello, Vlad, Dan, everyone.
Welcome again. On the other hand, we have Dan Nicola, a passionate agile practitioner, a CEO at StrongBytes, a man both focused on guiding teams in becoming self-organized and committed to delivering customer value at all times. A man known for not being late for any meetings in his life. That's quite an achievement, Dan. Congrats.
I think that was a subtle thing.
Never.
I try to make it to most meetings in time, right? I do struggle, but
or
you make
at least one a year.
You make it sound like a boxing match or a sort of a conflict there. It's Sandro versus Dan. Well, yeah, we kind of thought about doing this session together because we're aligned on a few things when it comes to software modernization.
Yeah.
So maybe it's us versus you, because you will be asking the question.
I'm not aligned with anything. So yeah, that's most likely the, the power balance over here. Well, I'm really looking forward to hearing your guys' thoughts on this subject. Because, you know, one of my favorite, so regarding this, the software modernization thing, one of my favorite software development story, a story that to this day continues to shape how I view software development and how I think it should be created and maintained, is that of the great Netscape rewrite some 23 years ago. For those who don't know, at that time, there were two main competing web browsers. None of them were called Chrome, by the way. They were Microsoft's Internet Explorer and Netscape's Netscape Navigator. Great name, great product. And things between them were going as well as they could in those early days of the internet, Wild West, when at some point the people at Netscape, well, they decided to rewrite their browser. Yeah, because the code was ugly, it was hard to maintain, it had some bugs, the app was slow. And does this sound familiar? Because for me, it kind of does. I've lived this. Well, long story short, this rewrite went so well that in the end, it bankrupted their company because, well, massive rewrites take a lot of time and a lot of effort, which means you don't have as many resources. So you can't add new features to your product as well as your competitors, which means you fall behind and then you lose market share. And well, at least we've got Firefox and the Mozilla Foundation, which is nice, I guess. But the thing that stayed with me through these years was that I would never, ever rewrite something that works unless I got a really good, I mean, really good reason for doing it all again from scratch. And I continue to pester everyone I know about this, so sorry about that. Well, basically, that's my software development story for today. And I want to ask you guys if this mirrors your experience. Sandro, would you say the rewrite attempt fits your definition of software modernization, or is it something totally different?
I think that there are different types of things that you do in a software modernization. And there are, you can modernize systems at many different levels, right? So a rewrite is one of the things that I would very, very rarely recommend. So I think that for me, the rewrite is the last resort. So, for example, let's talk about the different levels. You can do some small refactorings, right? The small refactorings, I would not consider software modernization per se. I would talk more about the continuous improvement of the software at a lower level. This is a thing that you just do as you are working with the system. But then you can start escalating the size of your changes. For example, you can start talking about modularization. You want to modularize the system. That is a little bit more than just a small refactoring, right? You might want to re-architect the system. That is also a bit more. You might want to re-platform, right? So, but a completely rewrite, we are just like rebuilding the entire app, you know, and I find that very rarely there is a justification for that. I would rather just focus on small areas that might not be working so well, and then just concentrate on that. But like, if you don't need to change certain things, I don't think we should change.
Well, not even if you want to use the latest and greatest platform, libraries, frameworks, SDKs.
Well, so then I think that we need to step back a bit and understand what we mean by software modernization first, and then what are the drivers to that modernization. And to be fair, I'm not sure if using the latest and greatest libraries are the best driver. However, it's not a driver that you should ignore completely, because for example, if your system is using technologies that are very old, and by old we can have many different definitions as well. So for example, are they being maintained? Are they being, for example, some of the technologies are being discontinued? And that creates a big risk to the system, because now you're building a system of technology that is not even maintained by anyone else. So that is a business risk. There are other technologies that are just old and there's not getting more traction. But then you might have a different reason for modernize. For example, attracting talent, attracting and retaining talent is a thing that very rarely is discussed when people talk about software modernization. But this is a key driver, right? It is a big risk if you cannot attract or retain talent in your organization. You have a problem in the future. So a modernization can have that as one of many other drivers as well.
Yeah, just to jump in on this, I think it's funny how sometimes, well, maybe all the times, the architecture of a product is actually mirroring the background and the skills of your team. I mean, if you have teams that are database developers or skilled in writing SQL languages, then your architecture will be heavily database driven and so on. But yeah, since you're starting with you started with the story, Vlad, and yeah, probably that was the problem with Netflix, because if I remember correctly,
Also Netscape.
Netscape, sorry, Netscape. They started with rewriting their system, and they were at 4.0. They needed to jump to the next version. They eventually skipped that version and released the following one 3 years later, and by that time they lost the market share. But I have one of my own. It's actually the first, and I think it's relevant for this talk. It's the first product I ever worked on. And a lot of things that happened in there are classic textbook. So in my first job, I was part of a team that was building an fintech solution. So it was quite innovative at the time. We're talking about almost 20 years ago. In the end, there was part of the solution that got patented for updating the statuses of transactions and whether invoices were paid or not. So it's quite interesting. But yeah, like all classic scenarios, we first created a prototype, a proof of concept to demonstrate that this works on a vertical. And business people wanted to demonstrate that to banks or to other investors. So we started adding new features, and before we know it, that got into production. So we went like that for 1 year. And after that, yeah, you reach that moment where, yeah, we all gathered in a room and drew things on the whiteboard because it was harder and harder to add new features to the product. There were things like, yeah, I can say it now, they were actually breaking, and then you would refresh and they're not breaking, and you refresh and the next time they're breaking again. So you couldn't figure it out easily what was happening and debug it. So yeah, we got to that moment when we sit around the room and we said, yeah, we need to rewrite all this. And after a couple of meetings like that, we created a pitch, and then we pitched that to investors. And to our surprise, they agreed because yeah, the system didn't have users at the time. They had something good enough to demo to interested parties. So they said, okay, yeah, we estimated about, I think 6 months. It took 1.5 years, doesn't matter. But we rewrote this and we made it greater. We did it like we wanted to. We used more technologies. But long story short, so this was a big bang approach. But long story short, after 3 more years, we were in the same, well, we changed office buildings, but we were in the similar room, the same people, and then we said, yeah, we need to rewrite this crap. But then we couldn't, yeah, we didn't even try doing the same pitch to the board. They said, yeah, there's no chance. So then we investigated ways how to do this while adding new features, how to replace parts of the old system in time. And by that time, we were getting, yeah, let's say requests from the product owners that for them, they were easy. So the system worked with a certain payment method. So I said, okay, we have this, we want to add a new one. We're gonna strike a deal in 1 week, then you can start adding it. But for us, it was, yeah, adding another payment method. It was a groundbreaking change. I mean, the whole system was designed to use just one. And then, yeah, we needed to, this forced us, but not being able to go to the board again with a complete rewrite, forced us to create a way. It was painful at first, I agree, but create a way where we could, I think over the span of 1 year, we slowly replaced or improved the system, but without shutting it down, without stop and adding features, just bit by bit.
And did you ever go through this again in the subsequent years?
But that, we constantly did that. We ended, so coming back to what software modernization is, I think it's not a big bang approach. Although the name sounds like it. When I say I'm going to modernize something, it's like, yeah, I'm going to take some time and make it right. No, it's a continuous process, and that's, you need to enter in that mindset. And that, yeah, your product and then the technology behind it should, the software should, yeah, advance hand in hand.
Yeah, I would like to say exactly the same. For me, continuous software modernization is not a thing that you do once. So it is a continuous improvement process, but also where it matters, I think. So normally I say that the software modernization is a continuous process of improving strategic systems. And the goal of improving those strategic systems is because you want, I know it sounds a bit cliche, but you want that business agility, right? So there is something in the business that you are not able to do anymore. Dan had mentioned a few ones, for example. After rushing a little bit at the beginning of the project, they started slowing down. They were not able to add features as fast as the business needed, right? So this is a constraint. It's a constraint to the business. Or if you want to add a new payment method, it's a big thing. Instead of just slide a new payment method into the system, now you need to refactor the entire. So this is why it needs to be continuous, right? So and only in the parts that matter. So this leads us. Dan mentioned quite a few points. I would like to go through some of them. One was the kind of not startup, but like building a product from scratch. I think that's what you mentioned right now. It's like you guys had to get something out quickly. And so there is the famous story of having a proof of concept or prototype that becomes the production. And to be fair, for a lot of organizations, that's exactly the right thing to do, right? So because what you want at that point, you want that quick feedback on the idea, on the investment, right? Is this even a business? And for that, you should do it as companies do. They should be able to answer the question, is this a good investment? Shall we continue investing as fast as possible? And if they need to push stuff out, push stuff out. Once the idea is validated, that's when they need to start thinking, okay, so if you're going to really productionize this, at that moment, they need to start the modernization. They need to start building new features while modernizing. So there's a continuous process. And in most of the cases, it should work in parallel as you are adding. So this is one of the many different ways of modernizing code. For example, you can modernize through new features, right? As you have new requirements and you put within the scope of the new requirements, the evolution of your platform, right? So that's for me quite interesting. Then another thing is, how do you prevent the big rewrites? One of the ideas is to modularize your system, right? So not always at the beginning of a project we can get the boundaries of the modules properly, but sometimes just a few hours, maybe a few days of some deeper analysis can give us at least a better understanding of what those modules would look like. So we know that, for example, I would not mix my payment logic with my order management or my customer management side. So they are different domains. So if we are able, although those boundaries will not be very clear, the APIs between them might have to adapt. If we are able to, mainly at the beginning, start modularizing, the modernization will always happen within a part of the system. And that goes back to what I was saying. I very rarely would find a reason to refactor the entire app. You only do that when everything is entangled. And even then, I would have a few passes in the modernization to modularize the areas that I care about or the business cares about. And the rest I would leave messy. Well, if we don't need to change, I would not change.
After all, it does make sense to invest time and resources in fixing something that doesn't really need fixed, even though it's ugly on the inside.
Exactly. That's it.
But then here's a question. You mentioned, both of you guys mentioned that you should continue. Basically, it's also about technical depth, right? It's about continually updating your software and continually removing this technical depth. But some of the projects I've been involved in, just didn't prioritize this as much as just adding new features. And then when is the time that you draw the line and say, look, no more, we're going to stop, or we're going to allocate, I don't know, 30% of our development capacity to just fixing things that should have been fixed in the first place?
I think, yeah, there are a lot of ways to handle technical debt. And yeah, first of all, yeah, technical debt always exists, for whatever reason, either because, yeah, we don't know how to do things, we don't know the roadmap, and we cannot prepare, let's say, the architecture of design of our system to what's coming next, or because we're in a time squeeze and the customer needs time to market. They're all varied reasons. But yeah, it has to be in our practice to focus on this. And I'm gonna take a step back, because one of the frequent discussions that I have is about business value in a software product. And yeah, we can all agree that when most people talk about business value, they refer to the features themselves. And that's the primary source of business value. But there are also others. I can have direct sources of value and also indirect sources of value. And for instance, if I'm going to focus on software design, or what we put as developers in the umbrella of refactoring, what we're doing is protecting our capacity to deliver features in the future at a steady pace. Because otherwise, the more your system gets, the bigger it gets and the more complex it is, we'll have a harder time delivering those features. And there is are also other things like, for instance, having continuous and automated deployment strategies, and then you make your deployments easier and faster, and you deploy in small bits and not a big bang from time to time. Also makes it easier for the business to test and validate things on the market. If you want to, let's say, like Sandro mentioned, you want to re-platform your software, then probably you're maybe you want to move to the cloud and have better scalability, and maybe that's also it's a good thing in itself, but also it involves some reduction of costs. And I think these are the way this works is that we constantly focus on this in parallel with building new features. And these are conversations that we need to have with all the stakeholders in the project. Because I'm jumping to another thing now, but I think one of the biggest impediments is that we as a team cannot convince or explain or cannot convince the rest of the people involved that are either from business side or other departments, what's the development process and what's the value, like you asked about, what's the value of such an initiative?
Well, I think it's also, yeah, how do you quantify this value?
So this is where I think that we more technical people fail massively, is this distinction that there is technical problem, technical debt or technical problems, and we distinguish that from the business, or we isolate that from the business. This is the mistake. We don't exercise enough the idea that technical problems are business problems, right? So if we cannot map a technical problem to a business problem, we need to ask ourselves, is this really a thing that is important and we should be addressing, right? As Dan was saying, like, so there are many reasons why you would change a system. And when we see inefficiencies, so we as developers, so we see, oh, you know, I'm spending too much time waiting for the test to run, or QA is very slow, or so on and so forth. If you think hard enough, well, to be fair, once you get used to the mindset, you don't need to think hard enough. It's very easy to map technical issues to business issues, right? So, but while you don't do that, you never know what to measure. Because, for example, saying that the build takes 3 minutes or 30 minutes, yes, it takes 30 minutes. So what? What is the impact that it caused? So I won't know because that's a technical metric, right? So, but what if I said that we have 400 developers, right? So what if we say that we had to do that, and then every now and again the build is red, and then someone needs to fix the code, and then we need to run it again to see if it's gonna be green so that we can merge a thing. So all of a sudden we start, it's not only about the 30 minutes of the build anymore. I can say, look, you know what? Your developers, they have like 40% or 30% of their time is just wasted. Look at the screen. So how much is it worth for you, right? So then you can start going to many different metrics depending on which kind of inefficiencies you are seeing as a technical person, right? So lack of tests is the same thing. So, well, I don't have tests. Yeah, sure. This class doesn't have any tests. So what? Well, we have 16 million lines of code. Okay, so that's an issue. Like one class not having any tests is fine, but 16 million lines of code is another problem. Why is it a problem? Well, because we make a change and we want to go live. How long does it take? It takes months for QA to do its job and find problems. And then as soon as they find problems, then they need to call developers. Developers need to change it. So this is where we need to map the technical issues with business issues. Otherwise, we will never be able to drive those changes.
I understand. But then, let's say you want to drive these changes, but yeah, you don't have as much your business needs to, let's say you're developing a product, right? And just that in Netscape's example, yeah, you're competing with Internet Explorer and you need to deliver new features all the time. How do you manage delivering those new features at a reasonable pace so that at the same time you're able to untangle the guardian knots scattered all over the application? How do you manage developing new features while at the same time updating your software, making sure it's a well-oiled machine?
So there's no magic in there, right? So at some point you need to pay the price. I think that the question is like, how do you convince the team or the organization to pay the price, and when? Right? So the longer you go, the worse, because we fail to show those trade-offs. That goes back to what I was saying. So the business, we always say, I want new feature, one new feature, one new feature. And that's fine for them to do that. That's what they are paying. They are not paying us. If you think about the business mindset, if we were the ones paying for the feature, for the money that I'm paying, I want the more features I can get and the fastest I can get. Of course, as a buyer, as someone is investing, of course we want that. So, but then it doesn't matter if what I won't have it. So if I don't listen to people, or when people come and start saying to me, Sandro, look, you want those 10 features during this period of time. So, well, I'll deliver 5 at best. And if they're not happy, I'll need to explain to them why not. So this is where we fail as developers. This is where we're spending time. Maybe we could deliver a little bit more, maybe not at 10, but maybe 7. But for that, we need an extra investment. And if you don't do that, it's going to get worse as we go along. But the problem is that just saying that is also not enough, because they will think that we are bullshitting them. So that's the developer just finding excuses. So this is why we need to be more disciplined and showing metrics and try to show to them how long the process takes, all the inefficiencies that we have, the amount of people involved, and sign-offs, and QA, and silos, and so all of that. And we also don't need to ask them for a big investment, because another thing is to say, let's say that they say, okay, you have an issue, you have loads of inefficiencies. How do we fix those inefficiencies? And then you answer, I don't know. It's going to take a long time. We need to stop building features. And I reckon it's going to take 6 months or to a year to fix everything I want. Of course, you're going to get a no in your face, and you should, right? Because you are not helping the case. You are going to someone else that is paying the bill and say, just trust me that there are inefficiencies and keep paying me until I fix all of this shit. And I'll tell you when I'm done. And in the meantime, you're not going to get a single feature out. And they will say, well, you are asking me money to fix the shit that you created in the first place. And that's when the crazy conversation starts, because I created because you pushed me to move fast. And then you are already clashing, right?
And what I can add to this is, because I've also seen situations where also teams or developers, there were a couple of situations where, yeah, I tried it like that. I don't want to have this conversation, but try to do it on your own. So it's about development. We're in charge with development. So yeah, let's fix our shit in our house. However, you're stuck in a vicious circle. I mean, yeah, you want to add some features, maybe you plan a bit less and with some capacity to make improvements, but at the same time, because your software is not in a good shape, you have bugs coming in from production, or then you have requests. You need to, I don't know, retrieve some reports because your system hangs for I don't know, 15 minutes and does not respond. So we need that ASAP. Can you feed it to us from the database? And then you get frustrated, or you're developing new features, and then you end up developing software somehow in the same way as it was done so far. And you know that patterns is wrong and you need to do it differently, but the only way to do it is just as it has been done before. So then you're going crazy in this way. So it has to be at some point an alignment and you need to be transparent about the state your software is. At the same time, the business needs to be aware of what's happening, and then you need to end up in a way when you can plan that roadmap together and blend improvements with new features.
Yeah, there are a few other things that I would like to add to this is that there is our own professionalism, and we at some point we need to say no, right? But there's also, this is not an easy thing, although I know that Bob Martin said a lot of, spoke a lot about that. I myself wrote a lot about that. But it's not an easy thing. It's not always just say, you don't go as a rebel. You are just one developer in a much bigger team and full of other people, and you say, I'm not gonna, it's not so easy, right? So we should do that. We should explain, but there are easier ways. One thing is to say, I'm not gonna do that because that's the wrong thing, and I want to refactor the entire world and blah, blah. That's also not a good professional behavior, right? So saying no, that doesn't mean it's no, and I will only do what I think is right. That's not what saying no means. Saying no is working with the business and explaining to them and creating a case and say, look, I know that we need you want this, but those are the implications. And you can shorten that feedback loop as well. If you are constantly talking to them about that, okay, we added a bit more feature, I'm going to show to you, we as a team, I'm going to not only demo, let's say if you're using Scrum or some iterative approach, and then every week or every 2 weeks you go and demo something, you should not just go there and demo the feature. This is something that we adopted this year in our projects. We changed how we do demos. So what we do is we don't only present what we achieved, we presented all the problems that we are facing, the risks to the project, the technical debt that might have been incurred like during that iteration or that period of time. So when we need to make decisions or trade-offs, for example, we need to deliver something by a certain date for some external deadline. That's another thing. Do we have external deadlines that we cannot control as a company, or do we just have like an internal deadline because someone wants that for whatever reason? That is a big distinction between them. So as a team, saying no is just no. It's basically like, okay, we're going to do that. We're going to show you regularly, but we are going to share that responsibility with you, right? We're going to share. So this is not just development team responsibility. This is a business decision. We are working on that. And by the way, on a weekly basis or 2 weekly basis, I'm going to be showing to you the issues that we have. So don't come to us in 6 months' time and say, hey, we have incurred that. And the way that you plan and factor in your refactoring is also important. There's always a way for you to say no, is say, this feature will take X number of time, X amount of time. And you don't need to justify every single nitty-gritty that you're going to do technically.
I think this is a brilliant approach, basically. You're involving the stakeholder and making them part of the team and part of this decision. So then when it comes to basically making the call to pay money for making the software better, yeah, for making it more stable, it's going to be way easier for them since they were part of the initial discovery session. Basically.
Yeah, so we end up putting in our demos, for example, we have one of our projects, we need to modernize a very key area of the business. We came up with 4 different approaches. We asked some time to do some experiments, and all the experiments have pros and cons. Unfortunately, and this is part of, I'm going to frustrate myself, but I was involved directly with that. We could not find a clear winner. So you know what, this is very complicated. And though we know that the way it is not great, we found ways to make it better, but all the 4 ways that we found that we could make it better have pros and cons. So we had to discuss that with our client. And the client picked one that probably we would not, given what we presented, and then the client was doing a risk assessment, and they end up in a very conservative approach that will be much slower and probably won't address the immediate needs that we wanted. But that was a conscious decision. And when we were presenting and stuff, I say, look, we had this debate with our client. So in this case, like if everyone is permanent, We had this debate with the product owner, with the project manager, or whoever the business people are. We had those debates, we had those things, this was mentioned, that was the risk presented, and there was a decision to go with this approach. And at every iteration, we're going to be talking about that. We're going to be progressing with that approach, but we're going to keep highlighting the risk. And this is a great way for you to say no, because you're not saying no. You are just working together and highlighting issues.
Again, I find that brilliant. We should try it.
I thought about what Sandro said earlier, and yeah, that's something we do as well when, for instance, there's a pressure to get something out ASAP. The customer needs it, needs a certain release in production sooner than it's actually feasible. And yeah, either you say no, that doesn't always work, or then you need to cut some corners that have consequences after that. And instead of waiting, I don't know, 6 months, and then you have this conflict, like, hey, remember when you asked us to do this, that's why we have these issues, and now we need to pay for them. You can do it sooner. You can be honest, look, we can meet your deadline, but we're going to do it like that, and we shouldn't. So then in the coming period, yeah, we should find some time to fix it or do it, let's say, the right way, whatever that is. And then you have, sometimes the customer says, all right, if it's like that, it's not really an urgent thing. So take your time, do it right from the beginning, or they acknowledge it. And then it's not a surprise when you tell them, yeah, that part of the code is not in a good state.
And I think this is also a good approach when trying to measure the progress of a software modernization in general, right? Because when the stakeholders are familiar with what's there and what needs to be done and basically what they're postponing, then it's easier to just follow. When in a sprint, I don't know, you fix something, you make something better, then it's easier for them to see, look, this was progress. This is where your money is, for those who are yeah in politics some years ago. Yeah, so basically they understand what they're paying for.
Yeah, this is key. And certain modernization styles are very technical. Not always we can align them, as there are many different ways of modernizing a system. And we need to figure out a way to show progress. But in order to decide how we're going to show progress, you need to be more precise when you define the scope of the modernization. So there is far more conversations that need to happen and understand, why are we modernizing this? What exactly are we trying to solve? What are the inefficiencies? How do we know that there are inefficiencies? Is it just a gut feel, or we have some way of measuring them, right? So we need to have those discussions, and then decide, before we even go into the modernization, decide how we're going to demonstrate that progress, and if possible, to have some metrics that actually make sense. Because you can always find metrics, but they need to make sense, because a lot of metrics are, again, and we need to be careful, because a lot of people say, well, yeah, but how do you measure that? So of course we need to measure. Of course, like, it's an investment, you want a return, right? But we need to be careful, first of all, not to apply a standard that is higher than our normal standard, because, for example, I can also go to our product owners and say, how do you measure the impact of this feature that you are asking me? Right? So how do you measure if it's done earlier, or if it takes longer? How much does it impact the business? Give me a number, give me a metric. They also won't know. So we need to be careful. A lot of people say, but where are your metrics? Where is your data? Are normally people that don't have any data themselves for whatever they do, right? So we just, first of all, need to make sure that we calibrate our conversation to the same standards, right? So, we are all trying to do the best here. And then with that in mind, okay, let's find the metrics that would help us to see progress. And not always is clear. We need to advance a bit more to refine those metrics. Because there is one of our guys, he used an expression that is not his expression, he read somewhere, but like, it's something like, tell me what you're going to measure, and I'll tell you how I'm going to behave. right? So we need to be careful not to pick the wrong metrics because you might have an undesirable behavior.
Yeah, it's very easy to game these things.
Speaking from experience. Well, yeah, I agree. Plus, it doesn't always make, you can't really get away with just saying, yeah, I want 6 months dedicated for researching this. I don't know what will come out of it, but I'm sure it will make the software better, because people are going to laugh in your face. So nobody's going to take you seriously. You do need to make a plan and to understand how you can define the progress and how you'll know when you're done. Yeah, because if you don't know when you're done, then you're never going to be done, except when you're done.
Yeah, so for me, like you need to run any modernization initiative as a normal project with a backlog, with stories, with demos and stuff. So you need to be showing that cadence of progress, and then as a normal project, or at least a normal agile project, a way to change the scope or even to stop work going that direction, change direction. So that should be part for me of the most. And as I said, I can go into more details because there are many different ways or styles to modernize system, and that would have a different dynamics in progress and metrics and stuff.
I actually wanted to ask, what approaches do we have for, I don't know, doing software modernization in an incremental fashion?
Mm-hmm. I think, yeah, each system is different, so each application is a different state. But I think the way we approach it, there are two things we'd like to start with, and one is getting a clear image of what's the desired situation, where we want to be heading. And of course, that's not a fixed, that will change in time. But what's the next step where we say, okay, now we're already happier with our software. It meets the current demands, and then we will evolve. And the other one would be make some sort of an analysis and saying, okay, what is the current state? What are the issues? Having also the business people and also the technical people getting an alignment with them and being aware of what's the pain point. Because maybe, I don't know, for me as a developer, I don't know, frustrated about certain things, but that might not be an issue. There could be a different route to take. And once we have this, let's say, two things more clearly defined, then we can envision small steps that get us in that direction. And here we can have experiments. We might even not be sure if certain things would be beneficial or not. So, or there might be different trade-offs like Sandro was mentioning, but then we could make small time box experiments. So say, okay, let's try it like that and see how it goes. Do some testing and then see if that makes the system, let's say, I don't know, this part of the system more modular. See if we can approach it like that and take it from there.
Yeah, so for me, there are levels, as Dan was saying, there are different levels of focus. The first one is with the business themselves, because before I go into the nitty-gritty how we're going to do that, we need to, first of all, be very clear why we are talking about modernizing our systems, right? So there are different categories and stuff, but like, for example, there are some strategic value that you might talk about. So for example, we might want to focus on, I don't know, preparing for future change. Maybe there is a huge stream of work that our system is not prepared to receive because whatever new things we want to do. Maybe there are new compliance or regulations coming in that our system either is not compliant or need to adapt and stuff. So risk management, right? So all of those things. So there are some things strategic that we are not able to do or won't be able to do, or it will be very difficult to do with the current situation of the system. So that is a strategic approach to modularization, which is different from talking about inefficiencies. So maybe something is very costly, we cannot release fast enough, or it's difficult to onboard people, or there are too many bugs. So again, now this is a slightly different perspective. It's about efficiencies, reducing costs, so on and so forth. That's a different take. Another one is experimentation. We would like to innovate, but it's very difficult. We can barely bring a new feature into the system. Imagine like really come up with new ideas and stuff. So basically, even to innovate, we need to understand where to innovate to. It needs to be easy to run a proof of concept, to prototype, and just to isolate one part of the system and innovate in that area and collect data and so on and so forth. So as you can see, those at the very strategic level, they are very different reasons for the modernization, right? So once we all understand what is the end goal, what we're trying to achieve, then we can start going into a little bit more detail of how we're going to go there. That's what Don was saying. Okay, now that we understand what we want to achieve, where are we today? Why are we not able to do that, or why it would be so difficult to do that? And then we start creating that path. And as I said, that takes, depending on what kind of goal, it will be a different strategy. For example, one we've done, you take new features. Let's say when Don said, oh, we wanted to add a new payment method. So we already accept Visa and American Express, and now we want to do Apple Pay or whatever, or right, so PayPal. And well, if you need to touch the entire system and deploy the entire system, clearly we have a problem. And because then you have like compliance and then InfoSec and all this kind of nonsense applied to the entire system instead of just being on the payment area. So basically you can take one feature and just take that feature, but that new feature you already design in the way that you want the future architecture, being a separate service, using a different technology, so on and so forth. And you create the foundation to migrate the existing ones to that new way. Or you can just take a full functional approach. It's like, look, you know, this area is problematic, this functional area, the whole payment system is problematic, and we are going to separate a team just to focus on the many different issues that the payment area has. You're not going to use a feature anymore. You're going to take the existing issues that we have within that area and solve them in a more strategic way. And then there are many different ways. So this is, I'm still talking about functional areas, payment, either as a flow or as a full area, but you can have business flows as well. So for example, one of our clients, they had users, internal users that haven't used the system, but for them to do their jobs and sell whatever they sell and maintain their clients, they need to go through quite a few systems or different areas of the system in a very inefficient way and copy and paste from one system. So you take a business stream and you create a modernization that aligns to the business flow. There are usability of the screens, there are technical components, hotspots. For example, you have too many teams. That's a very technical one. So too many teams that every time that they are working, they're banging their heads, they need to have code freeze, they need to synchronize all the changes together so they can be released together. And the reason is because they are working on similar parts of the system. So you want to break those things. So but as you can see, those are very different examples that you can, the metrics, the show of progress will be significantly different from each other, but they all have a business value.
Yeah, one of the, first I've read this somewhere way back, but then whenever we start this sort of initiative, I asked it to the customers, okay, if you would just write a simple hello world and you want to deploy it into production, what sort of things need to happen to get there? And then you find out, from system to system, there are various things, from the development side, different teams that need to work together, operations, in highly regulated environments, you need various levels of testing and documentation. And then you have the value strip mapping, basically. If you have one feature, you put it live, and that's what you go through. And sometimes it's also, you can justify it like that to the customer and then start optimizing there and end up with something that takes, I don't know, 3 months to put it in production, to be able to do it much sooner. We had this kind of situation with a customer in healthcare. and then everything was regulated. It was a huge process for anything. And at some point, even if you used feature branches and the team was doing these things, but then it's so tangled, and then only some features got accepted, others didn't. And at some point, for instance, we decided to implement feature toggles, and then we released everything, but then only activated once they were approved, and then we simplified the regulation part.
Yeah, the value stream mapping is a great exercise. So basically, just map, for those that might not be familiar, just map all these steps from an idea to software in production. So when someone in the business have some idea to what happens, what do they do with that? Do they generate documentation? They speak to product owners, how that goes to the teams, what do the teams do, so on and so forth, and then how do they test, how do they deploy, what happens when things go wrong. So having that, because sometimes the business, they cannot precisely say what is wrong. They just are unhappy, and everyone is unhappy. So like, you know what, things are not moving. We are not fast enough. Yeah, it's great to say that, but we need to be careful with the local optimizations that takes time to do, but doesn't impact the whole, right? So the value stream mapping is great because you can map all the steps, and not always everyone understands how many steps are involved in the process. And mainly when something goes wrong, a bug is found, or a deployment doesn't happen, or whatever, how far back it goes into the process, and then how long does it take to get back to where it was. And if you have multiple teams, how many of them are blocking each other? So once you map that, that can be a great source of modernization in the right areas, because now everyone understands where the bottlenecks are. So then you try to either remove the bottleneck or make them larger, right? So
in the end, yeah, the software needs to work and be productive. Gentlemen, I could stay here and learn from you all day long. I feel like already I'm brimming with ideas. I'm afraid we've reached the end of our allotted time slot. However, yeah, sorry about that. I wish I could stop time right at this very moment.
I would stay here for another 2 hours easily.
Yeah, well, we'll switch to another channel, Sandro, and let's talk.
We'll get our own webinar.
Yeah, precisely.
But yeah, it's indeed a broad topic.
Mm-hmm.
And
yes, it is. Thank you so much, Sandro, for being here. Thank you so much, Dan, for also staying here.
I'm gonna put now the other hat.
The cool cap.